All right, welcome back to the channel. I have a very special guest for you today. I have Sarah Sunnucks from Smith's Funeral Home that's going to do a great presentation today, and I want her to talk to you all about it. But first, let's introduce you to Sarah. Take it away, Sarah.
Hi, yes, so very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I am a licensed funeral director, and I have been for quite a number of years, and I've been at Smiths for almost 7 years now. And my primary job is to help people plan ahead and to also help them afterwards with some vital information for your executors. So that's what I do.
Yeah, it's excellent. So I've seen this presentation. Sarah and I are both part of the Burlington Networking Group in Burlington, and I was so blown away by this presentation. I thought my viewers, definitely on the mortgage side, as they're getting ready for retirement, or even if they have parents that are getting ready for retirement, was a great topic, and I know a lot of people are going to have questions about it. So I thought this was an awesome presentation that we should do for everybody. So why don't you present, and we'll jump right in.
I've named it end of life planning, which nobody really wants to talk about end of life planning because we always think that's, at the time when you've had that diagnosis or you're in the hospital bed and this is when the time is to end of life plan. But actually, everyone needs to know this information about end of life planning because we never know when that time's going to come. And the last thing we want to do is leave a mess for whoever is left behind to have to handle everything. So I've kind of added the idea of leaving a legacy, leaving things in a good way and not in a bad way. So when we talk about end of life planning, we are potentially talking about estate planning. And so estate planning does have to do with wills, power of attorney, and what those documents are for, investments long-term, like a TFSA, an RRSP. We're talking about life insurance. We're talking about assets, liabilities, succession planning. And then we're also talking about my specialty, which is the cemetery and funeral pre-planning. So planning all of these things is what is required for estate planning. So the first thing that we want to talk about is what is a power of attorney? And so a power of attorney is a document that you have signed and is, legal. And basically what that means is when there's a time where I cannot make decisions or I cannot make things for my health or things like that, I have someone set up who is going to help me with that. So a power of attorney only exists when someone is living. So it's someone who is acting on your benefit only, and it's for you financially and also for your health. So typically you could have two people, you could have one person, but basically this is a person who's going to be helping you when you're alive. A lot of times we think about this, when someone has Alzheimer's or when they have, cognitive functions. But I've actually used my parents' power of attorney just when they were traveling because they were unable to do something, renew their license on their license plate or something along those lines. So a power of attorney actually is needed today. And the other reason why we want to have a power of attorney is because you never know when you might have a car accident or when you might be in the hospital having surgery. These are all things when you need a power of attorney because there might be some complications where you would need that health person to decide for you what your wishes are going to be.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. So the next big question, and I get this all the time, is why do I need a will? And this is such an interesting topic because there's still a significant portion of the population who should need a will, who should have one already done, who don't. And I'm still shocked every time we have someone pass away without a will because I just think, man, you really missed out on a big opportunity. Now, to convince you why you need a will, I'm going to actually talk about what happens if you die without a will, because that's really what we want to protect. So if you die without a will, there's something called next of kin law. And basically that's what the funeral home has to use to determine who your voice is going to be when you pass away without a will. So the first representation that we have to find is your spouse. Now your spouse is somebody who is, technically married to you. And so in 2024, that could mean a lot of different things, a spouse. So that could be, someone that you might be separated from. That could be someone that you might be common law to, and maybe a new spouse, but your will might be outdated, so there can be a lot of complications to who your actual spouse is. And it's very difficult for us at the funeral home to determine who your spouse is because especially the common law situation, there's no real documentation for us to determine whether this is a roommate or a common law spouse, right? And common law status is very different when you're living than it is when you're gone. And there's a really important reason for that. And that is when you're living, you can both say, yes, we are common law, we are a couple. But when one of you has passed away, you only have that one person who can testify that you were a couple. And so without any legal documentation, it's a lot more difficult to be considered common law after death. So, unfortunately, I've been on the phone with people and I've said, like, I understand you were common law when this person was living, but actually, technically, you're not common law anymore. And so it can be very difficult because there is no documentation for that spouse to then be able to help you. And if you knew that would be a problem, you'd want to fix that, right? You'd want to make sure that that person had the legal authority to deal with what you wanted them to do.
Of course.
If you don't have a legal spouse, then the next person in charge is all of your children. And so as a mom of 5, I know all of my 5 children who would have equal say to me. And so equal say can be very difficult because I know one of those children would be a lot better at the finances. They'd be a lot better at the decision making. And the other ones might just create problems just to create problems, right? Because they do that in a normal situation. So having all of your children have equal say can be quite difficult. One common fight that we have is, what picture for the obituary do we want for mom? I want my wedding picture with mom, or I want, this graduation picture with my daughter, right? Like, so it can be quite difficult to figure out who is going to be in charge, and actually legally all of them are in charge and have equal say. If your children aren't of age, then it's your parents. Now, this typically is not too much of a bad situation, except for when you have maybe a younger person passing away, maybe in their early 30s, don't have a spouse, their parents have equal say, but maybe your parents have been divorced for 40 years or 30 years or whatever the status is of how long they've been divorced for. And they haven't been getting along for the last 10 years, right? And so they have equal say together. And so again, it's difficult for us to figure out who will be in charge of maybe cremated remains or what's going to happen with them. There's a lot of aspects to that as well. Then comes children, grandchildren, grandparents. And then the last one is siblings, where again, you might have more than one sibling and all of those siblings have equal say. They might not all get along. They might not all be in a position to be able to get together and figure it out. And so again, this is another reason why you want to have a will, because maybe all of your siblings don't even live in the country. They don't even live in the province. So it would be very difficult for all of them to come together and make all these decisions. And then of course it goes nephews, nieces, cousins, and therefore. And I have an example just recently. So it was someone who passed away, and they don't have living siblings, but all of their nieces and nephew now have equal say to their estate. So it is quite overwhelming for sure. So this is why you need a will. You really, really need a will. Everyone needs a will, because you want to make sure someone is in charge of your wishes and your thoughts and what you want to happen. So what is the role of an executor? So now you've got a will together. Who should be your executor? And this is a really important aspect of why people don't want to get a will, is because they don't know who should be their executor. So this is kind of a slide I like to use of how you should pick who your executor is, because a lot of parents feel like, oh, I should make all of my children executors together, but they might not all be available to be your executor. They might not all be the right person up for the task. So this is a really good kind of chart that I like to use. Who is the most trustworthy when it comes to financial skills, financial knowledge, who might be the most fair, who might be in the best health, right? Who might be in the best emotional state. If one of your children is just not in the right emotional state, after you pass away, they're not going to be able to make those decisions and to, step forward and make those, difficult calls, what that has to happen for an executor. They might not have them enough time or time availability. They might not be in the right location, so these are all reasons why you don't want to have that person as your main executor. And then this is kind of a little chart. This is obviously the most decisions you'd have to make, but these are about 80 decisions that could be made, potentially be made within 24 hours of your death.
Wow.
So you can see there's quite a lot of things that have to happen in a short amount of time. And so I always say, like, this is the number one reason why you want to get things done ahead, is because there's no way that your grieving spouse or your grieving children or your grieving, whoever's in charge is going to be able to manage all of this by keeping the right, focus in mind when they're grieving, right? And it's such a hard task. And so a lot of this can be done ahead. At the funeral home, a lot of it can be done ahead by planning ahead. And so these are the reasons why I do what I do, is because there's so much to talk about at the time of death. Another part of being an executor is obviously applying for benefits from Canada Pension, understanding where the pensions are coming in. You want to stop that. You want to be able to call them for anything like life insurance. So all that information needs to be given to your executor. A lot of pension companies or life insurance companies, sometimes they get bought up over the years. I know my dad's been bought a few times. And so that information has to be updated. It has to be kept up to date. There's things like probate tax, income tax. There's a lot of kind of bills that are for the estate. And a lot of people don't know what that might look like. What is probate tax? What is estate administration fees? Who has to pay those? And when do they get paid, right? And it is on the single assets for the entire estate. And so your executor might not be prepared for that kind of a tax to happen right away. And so you do want them to be educated. I just sat with a family, 5 kids, 3 of them are executors. Dad had 2 properties. They both have to be looked over with a real estate agent. They have to be put together of how much it would be worth if they were to sell. And then that is part of the tax they have to pay right away. And so unfortunately I had to say, do you have a real estate agent that you know? Because this is something you're going to have to pay. They had no clue. And they asked me, where's the money going to come from? And I said, well, it's a tax that happens. Executors have to pay it and then they pay themselves back, right? Well, not everyone has money ahead to pay themselves back with later, right? So you want to make sure they're available to do that as well. And then income tax, we can be taxed for up to 7 years. So can someone who's deceased. So there is some tax implications around that as well. And then fraud, security, vehicles, passwords, Facebook, Instagram, health cards, passports, credit cards, like there's the whole gambit, especially with so much going online. Our lives are very much online now. And so there's some security risks to that. And you want to make sure that your loved one is protected for sure. So end of life decisions should not be made at the end of life. Hopefully I've just kind of explained why, because
that's for sure.
A lot to go through. You want to get this done ahead, and it's something you should be doing ahead. And the average age for someone to pre-plan their funeral with me is around 71. And the reason why I use that number 71, other than the fact that it's true, is because typically term life insurance ends at 71. And around 71, 72 is when you have to start pulling out of your RIF. So there is kind of a shortness of when your life insurance ends. So you don't have that money for the funeral. And then you're now expected to pull money from a RIF. And so you might have some money in your budget that you might be able to prepay. So it's kind of like the perfect storm. You should definitely be prepaying your funeral, your cemetery at this time, because then there's money there available for the executor when you do pass away, if you only have term insurance, right? Because that's now ended. So when we talk about funeral pre-planning, what are we talking about, right? And a lot of people don't realize there's actually 4 available options for families in Canada. Now, they're not available in every location, but definitely this is something that is legal in Canada. Obviously, traditional burial in a cemetery is available to everyone. You can prepay all of that ahead. There's obviously cremation. Cremation is a very up and coming trend in our society, especially here in Burlington. We have quite a large amount of people who are prepaying. That's basically where I'm working most of my days. Now with cremation, what are you going to do with the cremated remains? Are they going to be buried in a cemetery? Are they going to be placed in maybe a niche wall or one of those walls where you can put cemetery or cremated remains into? Are you going to have them scattered? Are they going to go home with someone? Are they going to be commingled together? That's when we put, a couple together into one little location. Are there going to be maybe keepsakes taken out for jewelry or things like that? Cremation actually creates a lot more questions because there's a lot more you can do with cremated remains than a typical traditional burial. There's something kind of new that I'm really excited to be a part about, and that's natural burial. So the idea is being as green as possible as your final decision. We are a green funeral home, and we were the first in Canada. So it's something we're really, really passionate about, and that's giving families the option to be able to choose green or as green as possible. And then there's something called water cremation, which is not always available in every location, but there are 3 locations at least here in Ontario. The proper name is alkaline hydrolysis, but the idea is that instead of a flame, we're using water. So that's kind of the difference between those two.
It's almost all 4 elements.
That's right. That's true. So this is just an example of some of the things we show families in our selection room. So the idea is maybe to have a companion urn, so having an urn for 2 people, maybe using cremated remains for something unique like blown glass or artistry. A keepsake urn, this one typically has like a candle with it or some sort of memorial. And then we do offer keepsake necklaces or jewelry where you can kind of keep that loved one with you. As I had mentioned, we are a green funeral home. So what that means is we are part of the Green Burial Council of Canada. We were the first funeral home in Canada to join. And all it really means is we just want our standards to be available for green burial for families. Now, to be green is a unique thing to do. And so all of the people that I've worked with who have chosen green have had to plan and prepay and then get their families on board, because it's not something you're going to decide in that 24-hour span, right? Like, unless it's been talked about, unless it's been decided on, you still need a cemetery, you still need a lot of options for that. So it's something you do have to pre-plan. And so that's why it's such a passion of mine, is I do want to get this, kind of done ahead with families and not leaving it. Because if you leave it, they won't choose it, right? So it's a difficult situation there. So what does green mean? So basically we offer green caskets. So this one on that I'm showing here in this slide is what we call a green casket. This green casket can be used in any cemetery in Canada, because in a cemetery you need to have a lid. So this is a specific green. So it's been put through all the rigors of what needs to be green. There was no metals, no dyes. It's very plain looking, but that's the point. And then the other one is called a carrier. So this is made out of wicker. There's a shroud where the person's going to be shrouded in it. And this is for specific green cemeteries. So this is for a specific cemetery. You do have to have special permission to use this. But the idea is that this person will be going back to the earth as naturally as possible.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm. So this is just an example of one of our green burials in Ontario. This one happens to be in Picton, Ontario. It was a beautiful kind of forestry. As you can look, there's all greenery here. There's no gravestones. There's no outer containers. There's no ground maintenance. There's no carbon footprint. There's no embalming fluid. There's no casket. And the person's actually buried a little bit higher up above the frost line, so the natural bacteria in the ground will take effect the way it's supposed to. But it is in a local cemetery. So it is still in that cemetery. It still has to be in a cemetery at this point. And so this is kind of one of the natural burial selection areas. There are about 6 in Ontario. Hamilton Cemetery's just opened their first one. So there's a few that are coming along, but they're all considered hybrid cemeteries, meaning that the other side of the cemetery is a regular cemetery, and this is just a special section. Though we are working with the governments to try to have our first green cemetery, which the whole place would be like a conservative area. And so you would just walk along the pathway and there would be no kind of stones idea. It would be all natural greenery. So we're hopeful it's going to come soon, but definitely more people have to choose this for this to become something we can offer. And then the idea of funerals, it is for someone who has been left behind. It's for your loved one to be able to acknowledge that something big has happened for them. So why am I a promoter of doing something ahead is because we do want to help the person left behind. Grief is the loss of of the loved one, right? So if you didn't love that person, you wouldn't be feeling that grief, right? So it's actually the love that you're losing that becomes that grief in your life. And it drives you to really find connection with others. So a lot of times when we have people gathering together, it's to all get together and realize how much that person was loved and how much it affected their lives. Telling stories, bringing up wonderful memories about that person is really a way to make that person's life meaningful. And it's also a very stressful event. For some people, it could be the most stressful event they've ever had to go through, right? So, and a death can also cause a lot of financial stress and a lot of unknowns. Just people have never gone through it. And so there's a lot they just don't know. So that's my job here at Smiths, is I really do want to help families just acknowledge what's happened and just walk them through their next steps afterwards. So there's other ways that we can do this sort of memorialization that can be different and unique. And we're here to help you kind of be creative. We do have a lot of people who are doing receptions. One of these pictures here has some quilts on each, pew. The lady was a quilter, and so everyone got to take one home. The one with the school bags, the lady was a school teacher, and so everyone donated school bags, and it was such a great representation of that person to really give back in that person's name. There's things like planting trees, purchasing benches. A lot of people like to make big donations, maybe every year on that anniversary of the death. And then I've even done a champagne toast, which was quite fun for that person. It really represented that person's mother. And so it was just really a great time to kind of celebrate that person instead of it being very, somber and crying. We're kind of having a nice celebration.
I love that. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. So what are the advantages to doing this ahead? A lot of times people are like, oh, my kids can worry about that. I don't want to come in. I have a lady coming in today. She's like, I don't want to be here. My son can handle it. But then as we're talking, she does have a lot of opinions about what she wants. And the son's like, this is why you're here, Mom, because I want to know what you want to do. So, but there's also a lot of financial benefits as well. So it can be tax sheltered. So the income tax law does give us some room for putting money away just for funerals and just for cemetery. So there is some money available that can grow tax-free. And so it can be sheltered in that way. And a lot of people like that. They like the idea that they can hide a little bit of money just for funerals, just for cemetery, and all the interest that grows is tax-free. It doesn't affect their TFSA allotment. We can have a contract where they can put a casket in, an urn in, or service fees in, and they can be guaranteed on that contract. And what that means is when that person passes away, obviously inflation goes up, but we're hoping interest goes up as well. So we're hoping to get about here. But if the interest is lower than inflation, we take the hit. If interest is higher than inflation, which doesn't really happen this often, but if it does, the interest actually goes back to your estate. So it's always to your benefit to pre-plan, because at this point, we're seeing inflation is always higher, right? And so that guarantee is really beneficial as well. The plans that we use here at Smiths are transferable to any funeral home in Canada. So if you move to PEI, if you move to BC, if you even move to Ottawa to a nursing home to be near your daughter, that money can move with you. It's not stuck to our funeral home. It's not in our bank account. It is in a transferable plan. The best part is your wishes are known. We know exactly what you want. We can tell your kids, okay, this is what Mom wanted. This is her thoughts. These are her wishes. And then they're like, okay, good. I don't have to worry about that, or I don't have to make that choice. A lot of kids like knowing what the urn was or what the casket might have been. They don't have to make those choices because the choices have already been made for you. And that's kind of the last point. All the choices are made by you, right? And so you can make your wishes known for sure. And I have to say, it's easier on the staff too. If we know what you want, it's easier for us to then tell the families.
For sure.
And then kind of the last point here is just, grief is really that irony that the person you want to talk to is the person who is gone, right? And so the more we can plan ahead, the more we can get these things down on paper, the more we can get these things talked about, the easier that person who's left behind will be. One of the biggest conversations that I have as soon as someone passes away is on one of my documents, I have to ask, what was your mother's maiden name and where were they born? And your child might know that information, but when they're in that first moment of grief, they've forgotten, right? And so it really does make them think, you know what? Ugh, I wish mom was here so I could ask her, right? And so it's kind of that first time where they're really like, that kind of history or that kind of part of me is now gone, and now I have to kind of look for it myself, right? And it can be quite an overwhelming feeling to kind of be in realization the person I want to talk to is now gone, and I don't have that information right at hand with me, right? And so that's why I really encourage pre-planning, because you can have that name written down on my file. Your mother's maiden name was Smith, and she was born in Saskatchewan, right? And like the person's like, great, I'm glad my mom put that name down so I don't have to worry that I didn't know that answer, right? Now, if someone doesn't know the answer, obviously we put unknown, but isn't it so much nicer for that child to not have to then start that grief process and be like, oh, I wish they were here, I could ask them, right? So
100%.
that's why I do what I do, Dwayne.
I love it. Both my parents passed when I was really young, and I tell you, I have a lot of regrets. And if I would have went through this process with them, because they did do this, if I would have been there with them, there's just so much more I think I would have learned and known, and managing all of that in the end would have been a lot easier for sure. I love what you presented here today. It was incredible.
Well, thank you so much. And I always like to end that I'm a family-owned funeral home. I'm not on commission, so I'm here just to help families. So even if something's happened that you haven't used our funeral home and you have questions, concerns, we're just here to help families, and that's just really our heart. And we want to be here to help as much as we can.
I love that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all your information in the description notes for the show. So if anybody wants to reach out to Sarah and visit her and book an appointment, all of her information is going to be there. And I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to present this today. I learned so much myself. And I think this is going to be one of those videos where people just pause, take notes, go back, watch it again, rewind, and do it over, because you just provide so many valuable pieces of information, especially around the Green Initiative. That's pretty interesting topic there. So thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.
All right. Bye for now.